Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Benson Ku will defend the academic thesis, the associations between social environment, neurobiology, and psychotic disorders. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Thank you very much, Prorector. Thank you, Corona members here, my supervisor, friends and family at home watching online. I'm very excited today to defend my thesis. I will open my talk by describing psychotic disorders and schizophrenia in general. So a lot of the work that I've been doing focuses on schizophrenia, and this is a very serious mental illness. It affects around 1% of the population worldwide. This disorder is oftentimes associated with poor social functioning and day-to-day disability. The age of onset for this disorder for men and women are different. Men tend to have it in their, start to have the onset in their early 20s, and for women, their late 20s or early 30s. You know, the causes of schizophrenia is still largely unknown, but we speculate that there may be genetic and environmental factors involved in the development of schizophrenia. And as a whole, you know, for our field, we've been turning towards the term psychosis instead, to better understand the development and what causes and what are the different factors that interact and lead to the development of schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. So in my talk, you might hear me interchangeably use the term psychosis and psychotic disorders as well. You know, when we talked about the causes of schizophrenia, you know, a lot of the work that my thesis evolves in is investigating environmental factors and specifically neighborhood level factors. So to give you some background and context, the associations between neighborhood factors and schizophrenia dates back to 1939. Ferris and Dunham in Chicago were one of the first researchers to find that there were higher rates of schizophrenia in the more inner city parts of Chicago. And since then, a lot of other researchers, mainly in Western Europe and high-income countries, have also found the association of urbanicity and greater incidence and prevalence of schizophrenia. But it wasn't really clear why that is the case. Why is urbanicity such a big risk factor for schizophrenia? More recent studies have found more consistent results showing that smaller areas measured at the neighborhood level or census tract or zip codes, several of these characteristics may explain the urbanicity effect on schizophrenia. And those three neighborhood characteristics are poverty, residential instability, and ethnic density. And the work that I've been doing for my thesis basically further delves into some of the possible reasons and mechanisms of why this may be. Some of the work that has been, some of the researchers have criticized the work that Ferris and Dunham have done because it wasn't really clear the directionality of the associations. So for example, do people who develop schizophrenia tend to move to these neighborhoods, or do the aspects of the neighborhoods actually cause schizophrenia? And this is termed the ecological fallacy because the outcome level is at a group level. They looked at rates and prevalence rates. So the reason why I say that is to kind of give context of the direction that I'm taking and building upon the prior research to kind of investigate what directionality, how much is it in one way versus the other, but also looking at outcomes at the individual level to look at age of onset, to look at more neurobiological outcomes, to further investigate the kind of trajectories and the different pathways in which neighborhood factors may impact the development of psychosis. One of the first studies that I conducted was using the data set called the Atlanta cohort on early course of schizophrenia. A lot of this data was collected by Dr. Michael Compton in Atlanta, Georgia in 2010. And most of the patients who were part of this study, they were recruited from Grady Memorial Hospital, which is where I work as a clinical psychiatrist. And previously, I had shown this map of Atlanta, Georgia, and the highlighted yellow parts are the neighborhoods in which these patients are coming from. And this study initially sought to identify the key factors that are predictors of onset of psychosis as well as duration of untreated psychosis. However, I looked at patients' neighborhoods by looking at their baseline addresses and then geocoding them to area level factors. And what was very interesting was that we found, after looking at 13 different neighborhood factors, that neighborhood level residential instability was associated with earlier age onset of psychosis among those with first episode psychosis. And residential instability is defined as a place where there's a lot of turnover, a lot of people moving around. So we wanted to see if this result would also hold up in a different sample. And so I used data from the North American Prodrome longitudinal study, collected over 8 different sites in North America. Elaine Walker had helped me obtain access to this data set, as well as to the area level and neighborhood factors associated with it. And among this cohort of youth at clinical high risk for psychosis, so they haven't had full-blown psychosis yet, but at clinical high risk, we found that childhood exposure to area level residential instability was associated with greater odds of conversion to psychosis 2 years, within 2 years after the baseline. We later on looked at what is this residential instability, what does it mean? And in a lot of the sociology literature, this area level residential instability is used as one of the factors to measure what's termed as social fragmentation. So if you think about a neighborhood where everyone else is moving, there's not a lot of opportunity for neighbors to know each other, for there to be social cohesion, for there to be a sense of belonging. And so this was empirically used by many scientists to kind of capture this fragmentation of a community. Later on, we looked at what point does the phenotype occur after exposure to social fragmentation. And we found that exposure during childhood to fragmentation resulted in later on declines in social functioning. And this is using the data set from Naples. Interestingly, we found that there was no association between social fragmentation at childhood and functioning at childhood. And we also found that there was no association between fragmentation at adulthood and functioning at adulthood. But there seems to be this lagged effect between childhood and young adulthood. This association was partially explained by greater maladaptation to school during childhood as well. We also looked into the brain morphology of these youth clinical high risk, and we found that there was this association of social fragmentation as measured by residential instability resulted in brain changes, especially brain gray matter volume reductions in 2 particular areas of the brain. And those particular areas are in the prefrontal areas of the brain. And this also aligns with a lot of previous research with researchers looking at fMRI, which is kind of changes in brain activity measured by blood flow signal changes in the same regions of children who were brought up in cities as opposed to more rural areas. These findings suggest that perhaps the social nature, the social environment may partially explain the effects of urbanicity on psychosis. Another brain area that has been implicated in schizophrenia is the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is a region in the brain that is very rich in glucocorticoid receptor, meaning that it's very sensitive to stressors. And hippocampal volume is one of the least heritable aspects of the brain, and also kind of pointing towards the fact that it may be more sensitive and vulnerable to environmental stressors. And so what we also found was that living in poor neighborhoods was associated with reduction in hippocampal volume among youth at clinical high risk for psychosis. And this is this relationship between neighborhood poverty and disadvantage and hippocampal volume has been seen in many other studies as well, so it's consistent. However, the additional thing we found that was very interesting was that the level of social engagement of the individual also mattered, and it seemed to buffer the relationship between neighborhood poverty and hippocampal volume. We also found that social engagement buffered the effects of childhood exposure to ethno-racial composition and cortical thickness among youth, ethno-racial minority youth in the US. And we see that these brain regions highlighted in red were varied according to the level of ethno-racial composition. So what this means is that if you're an ethno-racial minority youth and you live in an area where there's more other minorities, that seem to have a protective effect and that seem to be associated with preserved cortical thickness, especially of the regions of the brain known as the insula and fusiform of the right hemisphere. But you know, if you look at their degree of social engagement, it seems like the greater the social engagement, the association between the neighborhood factor of ethno-racial minority density and cortical thickness was no longer significant. And so we see perhaps social engagement may also buffer the deleterious effects of living in certain types of neighborhoods on the brain as well. So far I've talked about 3 different neighborhood factors: residential instability, poverty, ethno-racial density. You know, we're actively looking into what role does genetics play as well, and gene by social environment interaction. This is an area of active investigation for us, but as part of my thesis, I've looked into studying using the ABCD, or Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study data set. This is a study using more than 10,000, that has more than 10,000 children ages 9 and 10, and they were across 22 sites across the US. We decided to measure social environment in a different way. We looked at physical activity. So physical activity could be broken down to 2 different categories. From this list, they were asked about 23 questions about 23 different sports and their level of involvement in each sport. And these sports included things like basketball, baseball, which was more team-based. And then there were also other sports, including running or weightlifting or swimming, that did not necessarily require a team to play in. And we, because of the data that I've generated before, I hypothesized that perhaps the team-based sports, because of its nature of social interactions, may have a greater protective effect of psychosis compared to the individual sports. So we collected all the information from these 9 and 10-year-old children, and also looked at their level of activity, physical activity, as measured by what they reported, what their parents reported, as well as Fitbit data. And we measured it initially, and our outcome was psychotic-like experiences, which are more of a sub-threshold symptoms of psychosis. And we measured this across 4 years. So we want to see the outcome to be persistent, distressing, psychotic-like experiences. And we wanted to also take a look at whether genetic polygenic risk score for schizophrenia interacted with these physical activities. And what we found was very interesting. We found that both the physical activity and genetic polygenic risk for schizophrenia, they both independently predicted persistent, distressing, psychotic-like experiences. But in addition, there was a significant multiplicative interaction among them. And that interaction was very specific to team sports, but not to individual sports. And what I'm showing here is how that interaction looks like. And in the bold line, in the straight line, shows those who have greater involvement in team sports. And among those individuals, we do not see a significant association between polygenic risk for schizophrenia and the persistently distressing psychotic-like experiences. However, we see the strongest association, this positive direction, among those who have lower levels of team involvement in team-based sports. So this is just the kind of the start of looking at a different way of measuring social environment. Obviously, there's using different methods. There's limitations to different approaches, and the causative component to it to psychosis is still remains. There's a lot more investigation we can do with more longitudinal and different data sets to replicate and to find robustness in our findings. But with this, I will end my thesis. I want to acknowledge a lot of the different mentors and the people who have helped along the way. Thank you, and I will turn the discussion back to the prorector.
Thank you for your presentation. The opposition will be opened by Professor Rutten, Professor of Psychiatry at this university, and Professor Rutten was also the chair of the assessment committee.
Dear candidates, echo? No, that's better, I think. So compliments to all your work. It's fascinating to see a clinician as you are to do this extraordinary type of research and having these wonderful findings on a very relevant topic. Also compliments to your supervisory team who have brought you to Maastricht. It's a pleasure being, I think, for you in Maastricht. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it to be present at the day today, so my apologies for doing this online. But nevertheless, I think it would be great to deliberate a bit on your findings and to see how you would think maybe to the next step further along the path you've taken so far. So my first question relates to, I think, to approximately everything in your thesis. It's like a broader question whether the findings that you have on social fragmentation, social connectedness, are they specific for the trajectories towards psychosis, or may they be also very relevant for other phenotypes in mental health phenotypes and even somatic phenotypes, I would assume. Is there any data backing this up, or could you elucidate or tell a little bit about this or hypothesize on this topic?
Thank you, my highly esteemed opponent, for the compliments, as well as raising some really excellent questions about the specificity of the exposure and the effects, potential effects of social fragmentation, as well as other area level characteristics. From the systematic review that I've conducted looking at social fragmentation and psychotic disorders, it seems like the association was very specific to non-affective psychotic disorders. And the association was not really that strong between social fragmentation and affective psychotic disorders. However, I think some of the literature may be mixed, and it could be different depending on the different countries and different contexts. Social fragmentation index was originally empirically measured by Peter Cogden in his study of suicides and parasuicides in London in 1991. And he had found associations of social fragmentation index and suicides. However, not a lot of literature have replicated those findings. Most of the literature that I've looked at social fragmentation index, as well as the components of social fragmentation have largely focused on psychosis. There's not been a lot known, I would say, with other kinds of disorders. I would be curious to kind of explore that in a more rigorous way in different data sets. One of the limitations of looking at this data in the US is we're not analyzing everyone. We don't have a registry for those with psychotic disorders or other mental health disorders in general. But I think having that data and having longitudinal data, we can better tease apart the effects of social fragmentation on psychotic disorders as well as other mental health disorders. Yeah, I guess that's.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very clear answer, I think. So lots of work still to be done. Let's move to another to a specific chapter. I would like to take you to chapter 6, and I think you also presented this a few minutes ago in your lay language presentation. I think these findings are fascinating, particularly because I'm myself also from a family with a high risk for psychotic disorder. I'm doing team sports, and I was also reading your findings and also saw effects of sex. And I was wondering, I didn't see a discussion on those findings, but maybe you could talk a little bit about whether you found anything related, whether the findings that you did were maybe specific for males or females, or maybe would be present in both sexes. I didn't see that in your thesis, but maybe you've done some further analysis on this.
Well, I think that's it's a very important and interesting inquiry about sex differences. Even with the association of between social fragmentation and psychotic disorders, there have been studies that look at differences either by looking at subgroups, just by males and females. I believe the association may be a little bit stronger among males for that association, but to look at true differences and looking at interaction effects will require very large sample sizes to see if those associations may be different. In terms of physical activity and genetic risk, we did not really look into that as much yet, but I think that could be a future direction in terms of our research to understand better the sex differences.
Yeah, thank you very much. So no clear answer yet. Then maybe a more open question as well. You've been talking about neurobiology from the perspective of imaging. You talked about the hippocampal data that you found. You also used photogenic risk scores, which are cumulative risk scores for genetic risk. And I was wondering, how would you envision making next steps in trying to pinpoint which biological processes may be the most relevant in the associations that you have found? Any ideas for subsequent work?
I think there are many ideas. I think psychosis is very heterogeneous. There could be psychosis mainly, I think there are many different causes. I think, we've seen this with examples with rare copy number variants, a lot of different associations that have big effect sizes, but maybe rarer. But I imagine that their interaction with the environment, I hypothesize that they will be different for those with more with greater polygenic risk scores, for example, as opposed to those copy number variants. But I think that the next steps of this is really looking at neurobiology, maybe one component to explain some of why living in certain neighborhoods may confer risk for psychosis, but maybe not for others. Maybe it's mediated through other biological processes that have not really been explored yet. For example, we're looking actively into epigenetic aging. and that maybe inflammatory markers may be more relevant in some cases. And we're only looking at morphological brain changes as part of my thesis, but I think other aspects of looking at neurobiological changes may be important as well. For example, hyperconnectivity. I think one of the next projects that we're aiming to do is to look at, with the hippocampus as the seed, hyperconnectivity to other regions of the brain and how that may be implicated in the development of psychotic disorders as well as neighborhood social fragmentation. Other things that we speculate, looking at mismatch negativity as measured by EEG. We know that deviations of mismatch negativity.
Maybe I can interrupt, because I think you could continue for probably more than 5 or 10 minutes to sum up further ideas. And I think I would like to share, thank you for sharing your insights. And I think I would like to give back the word to the prorector.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Delespol, Professor of Innovations in Mental Health Care. Professor Delespol was member of the Assessment Committee and he is the Secretary of the Degree Committee.
My congratulations for this interesting PhD thesis. It addresses important aspects related to gene-environment interaction and the onset of psychotic-like experiences, and probably beyond, as it was discussed already. It contains a collection of papers published in high-impact journals in the finest tradition of analytic epidemiology. I herewith also congratulate the promotion team. I really like studies in analytic epidemiology because they help us unpeel different layers of interpretations on the causal track. But of course, because it's a correlational nature of data collection, it's just a hermeneutic process to explore the possibilities of that causal track. I was triggered by a statement in one of your papers. I paraphrase it a little bit, but it says that the group level characteristics, in CARSO, the social fragmentation, can be used to avoid or even control the possible correlational determinants in the individual. If you have a child that moves a lot, it's different than living in an environment where a child moves a lot, because the reasons why the child or the family moves might be related to the illness. But I thought it was a bold statement, basically, because you would expect, of course, to have that causal effect there, and maybe you even get rid of important variances in the data that are related to your topic and the prediction of your topic. So I wonder what your response would be there. How far can you defend that strategy?
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, highly esteemed opponent. I think just to kind of make sure I understand what you're pointing at is that there may be many things and life circumstances, experiences that an individual experiences that that may be associated with why they're moving a lot, and to kind of and I think what you're trying to point out is that it's important to also investigate those other factors as opposed to just adjusting away those other factors. Am I correct? And
yes,
and that'll be, and I think that's quite important. I think we need to know which aspects that we're analyzing. Many of the reasons why we adjust and have a lot of covariates is because we want to see, we have a hypothesis that it's the kind of social disruption of the ties that we really want to focus on. I think if other aspects like other life circumstances that causes them to move may be relevant, I think that should be also analyzed along the causal chain. Mm-hmm. And I think a more careful approach with a bigger data set that has more carefully curated some of these experiences and circumstances would be very important to understand.
But would you also expect that the effect of that, your friends, for instance, are moving and you're left alone, might it be something that is related to the fact that you're more in control of the things that happen to yourself than things that happen in your environment? Might that be one of the aspects of a higher impact, or?
That an individual is more in control of their environment?
Would expect that for adults because they move and not the children.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because we're ongoing, there's qualitative study that we have ongoing. We ask people about their neighborhoods, and instead of just retrospectively analyzing the data set that we have. And it's very interesting that we're beginning to see, and when I ask people who live in more residentially unstable neighborhoods, they often talk about their schools and how they used to make friends, but those friends moved away. And so, one of the quotes is like, "Well, what's the point of me reaching out and making new friends?"
Investing in relations.
But a lot of this is happening, in their environment. But I think that can trickle down and have an impact at the individual level. And if they've grown up and that's all they're experiencing, then they're learning certain things from their childhood, and perhaps those ways of coping with stress or ways of adapting to things that change in life, may not be so great, and perhaps those things may lead to, and combined with genetic vulnerability, could lead to greater declines in functioning and psychosis.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Pries, postdoc at the Maastricht University Medical Center. Dr. Pries was also a member of the assessment committee.
Dear candidate, congrats to your impressive thesis, interesting results, and also congrats to the supervisors. I'd like to start with a more methodological question. So in chapter 2, you looked at social fragmentation, maladaptation, and social functioning in clinical high-risk individuals and healthy controls, as far as I understood. And I was wondering if you controlled for that status, whether they were high-risk or healthy controls. I see there was an interaction effect later, but in the mediation analysis, I couldn't understand if the status was controlled for, and if you would find similar results, if you would stratify the analysis based on the case or not cases.
Well, I think for that particular study, I don't think we adjusted for it as a covariate. I think we investigated the two groups of healthy controls and youth at clinical high risk separately after we found that there was a significant interaction. So we looked at the clinical high risk status as more of a potential moderator as opposed to something that we wanted to adjust away. Because we hypothesized that based on a lot of findings from other researchers, that those with early psychosis and those who are healthy, they may have a different, there's the associations between the neighborhood factors and their functioning may be quite different between the two groups. So that's why we decided to look at the interaction. And once the interaction was significant, then we plotted the simple slopes and looked at the two groups separately.
And what exactly did you find when you did the stratified analysis?
Yes, when we did the stratified analysis, when we looked at the two groups differently, we found that that there was greater declines of functioning that was based on area level social fragmentation just among the clinical high risk for psychosis group. However, for the healthy control group, we see a slight decline, but it wasn't really significant.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks for clarifying. Then I have some more broader question. So your studies are mainly in the US samples or American samples. And I was wondering, do you have an idea what would maybe differences in other countries, in European or Asian countries even, based on the area level factors?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in the systematic review that we conducted, we found, which encompasses countries in China, mainly Western European countries, involving the EGI data set. I think those are the other countries that in Australia, we saw this similar trend of aspects of social fragmentation index being related to greater prevalence and incidence of non-affective psychotic disorders, including schizophrenia. So we see this being replicated in many other countries as well, but I don't think that they have much has been replicated in terms of looking at outcomes at the individual level as much.
Mm-hmm. And could you think about any differences that might occur in different countries?
Yeah, sure. I think that there could be many different factors that could, contextual factors relating to policy or even how the data is collected or how the illness is defined. I think that could be very interesting to explore the differences and why there may be such a big difference in terms of variability of how much social fragmentation or other neighborhood factors may be related to the onset of psychosis. Other factors could include things like how tolerated, or how they view mental illness or mental disorders, and so on and so forth. But I think that's a really interesting future direction for us to take.
Okay, thanks. I would give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Kahn, Professor of Physical Health in Psychiatric Conditions, Professor Kahn at the Utrecht University. Professor Kahn was also a member of the assessment committee, and we highly appreciate your participation to this academic ceremony.
Thank you very much, Prorector. Dear candidate, first of all, I really read your thesis with a lot of interest. It's really a beautiful work. Also, congratulations to your team, your team. So I just want to actually discuss a few questions I have on chapter 6, and I find those particularly compelling. Your findings suggest that social physical activities may have a stronger protective effect against PLEs compared to non-social physical activities. I just wondered about the distinction between social and non-social activities. Because, for example, dance, I saw also in your thesis, is as a non-social, is defined as non-social. So I just wondered, it can be both social and individual, because depending on the context, of course. And do you agree that this dichotomy could be misleading?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question and an opportunity for me to clarify. I think it's I wrote the thesis a few months back, but if I were to revise it, I would just call it team-based and individual sports, as opposed to social and non-social. Yeah. I think that's a better way to move forward, because you're correct that that there may be social aspects of individual sports. We initially conceptualized and called it that based on, and we even took a lot of different approaches to group the categories of physical activity in sports based upon a lot of surveys that were done, just asking a lot of people through Amazon how they were to conceptualize and group physical activities into team-based, non-team-based, social, and non-social. But after considering this and after having a lot of discussions, we decided to, in the actual manuscript, to change it to team-based and individual, because we do think that there could be other social aspects, and we would like to decrease the likelihood of being misleading with our results. But thank you for bringing this out.
Yeah. Yes. And do you think then, so you already say, well, this might be the way forward to look at team sports and individual sports. Is it, what do you really think the difference would be? I have an idea, but what is your idea about that?
Well, I think with team sports, and this is a lot of is kind of based my own experiences. There's a sense of perhaps there's more camaraderie and aspects of team sports that may foster feelings of belongingness or just feeling like you're part of a team. And I think there's a lot of skills that you learn from being in a team-based sport that just kind of learning to work with others and as well as feeling supported by others. And I think that can be a really powerful thing when you're exposed to that and you learn that from a young age. And I think there's so many things about our learned behavior that may not be so evident at that time, but I think chronic exposure and learning this through a period and duration of time may be important in offsetting maybe some of the stressors that one encounters throughout life. So I think that there may be, but I think that may be the case also with individual sports. But I think that there's more of that in team sports, maybe. Yeah. So that's my
I
hypothesis.
can understand. Yeah, I do understand your thinking on this. I just wondered when I was reading it, that's always the question I have. It's like, do the individuals that have a higher risk to develop psychosis actually gravitate towards the individual sports? So how, and that is actually due to sort of a symptom of social withdrawal. So that's maybe what you're measuring. I don't know if you thought about these problems.
And that could be a very interesting finding as well. If that is the case, we plan to kind of further dig deeper into this. And there's several ways that we can do that. We talked about looking at genetic risk for lack of social motivation, or looking at and looking at how much of that explains what we're finding. Kind of incorporating that into the model. But it's very difficult to tease that apart. What comes first? Like, are they selecting themselves into or not selecting themselves? Which is why we have different methodologies and different ways of looking at social interactions at the neighborhood level with sports and the individual level. Yeah. So I think, we'll continue to kind of investigate this with those different methods.
So it's difficult to tease apart. I understand that. So do you think we need a sort of a polygenic risk score for physical activity? I don't know if it exists actually. Is that something that could be helpful?
Oh, I think that could be really helpful to gather a lot more information about it, especially more objective ways of quantifying levels of of physical activity. I think that could be potentially a really good phenotype that we can base our polygenic risk off of. And it could be interesting, given at least these preliminary data, to further investigate how that may be impacting mental illnesses in general as well.
Yeah. Then I have another question. In lifestyle psychiatry, I don't know if you know that, there's a debate about social interactions that you have in physical activities, irrespective if it's team or individual sports. And we wonder whether it's not the physical activity that's actually protective or you can use in treatment, but it's actually the social interactions that actually drives the effects. I don't know. I don't think you could do a look at that in your study because you don't have, I think, right? Am I right or not?
I think that's in terms of the literature review that I've conducted. People are the effects of physical activity on depression is more well known. But on psychosis, it's a little bit more mixed in terms of its literature. And I think that some reasons why could be because maybe it's because certain physical activities for example, team sports or activities that involve more of a social interaction, maybe that could be more explain the effects. And that's, I mean, I'm biased. I think that that's the case. I agree with you, but I think that we need to be a little bit more careful before we kind of say something like that. I think it'll be interesting to collect prospective data and to assess this a little bit more carefully and to try to replicate these results. But I have a hunch that I think that it's probably the social interactions that may be quite important in offsetting risk for psychosis.
Well, thank you so much for having this discussion with me, and I'll give back the word to the prorector.
Right, thanks.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Ukok, Professor of Psychiatry at the Istanbul University. Professor Ukok was member of the assessment committee, and we also highly appreciate your participation to this ceremony.
Thank you. Congratulations for this elaborate and comprehensive work. Actually, I found the opportunity to listen your presentation in a last SIRS meeting. I think it was about chapter 2. In different parts of your thesis, you focus on the different parts of different neighborhood risk factors like neighborhood poverty, area level residential instability, or area level social fragmentations. But it seems that one of the topic of interest for certain study is also the potential confounder for the next one. So although these risk factors are different and unique, but it seems that there is a huge overlap or interrelationship between these risk factors. My question, for example, you found that you state that in chapter 3, there is a correlation between gray matter volumes in different parts of the brain and the area level of residential instability. And in the next chapter, in chapter 4, you report also there's a correlation between the hippocampal volume and the neighborhood poverty. So, of course, it is not the animals, they can't control every confounding variable, but at the end, in this case, it seems that everything is related to everything. So my question about how would you exclude these potential potential variables? Otherwise, my concern is our results looks a little bit simplistic or reductionist.
Thank you for raising these questions, highly esteemed opponent. I think that when we look at different models, I think it's possible that different neighborhood characteristics may be related to different outcomes. And that example you about area level residential instability and gray matter volume reduction, we took a lot of effort to adjust for many individual confounders, including socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, but as well as area level factors like area level ethno-racial makeup, area level socioeconomic status. And I think that we on the one hand, we try to isolate the effects of certain neighborhood characteristics. And this is a lot based on literature that have shown that different types of environmental stressors, namely, for example, deprivation versus threat, may have different neurobiological mechanisms, even though they may result in similar phenotype. So our approach is really to try to be informed by theory, to test some of these associations and longitudinally, but also carefully select for covariates. Now, the other thing is, as my research, as we gather more and more evidence and we know about different area level or neighborhood factors that may be related, we want to put them together in a model. So what we're beginning to do is looking at them in like a structural equation model and looking at various different neighborhood factors. Maybe one is more representative of threat and deprivation, and we see that there's different mediators that may be explaining their association with outcome. So that's one approach that we can take. I think another approach we can take is looking at all these different neighborhood factors together and looking at accounting for their covariance structure of these highly correlated neighborhood factors. We can use mixture models to then look at the relative weights of each of the individual neighborhood factors. And so that's another way to kind of tease apart the cumulative effect, but also the relative contribution of different neighborhood factors and how they may be related to specified outcome in psychosis.
Thank you. I think I have still time for a quick question.
Absolutely.
I was wondering your opinion. Do you hear me?
Yes, you can continue.
Yes, yeah. Loneliness is also another risk factor. It differs from the social isolation. I was wondering your opinion about if it is worth to visit, worth to study, as a risk factor for development of psychosis in young people. If so, how would you measure it? Because it's a little bit difficult to measure because it's a subjective experience.
To clarify, do you mean you said loneliness as a how
Yes.
do you investigate that as a okay? Well, a lot of previous
Yes, and do you think it is important risk factor?
It's a very important risk factor to investigate, and I think that's very timely, more important now, especially given a lot of the focus and a lot of media focus on especially the effects, potential effects of social media on youth. But I think that it's a difficult thing to measure. Other studies have used the UCLA loneliness scale and many studies have used self-reported measures to look at the social environment. I think that that's one of the things I was trying to get at with the social fragmentation index, which offers an objective way to quantify and measure the social environment, which may be in part related to loneliness. If you think about living in a neighborhood where or a school where a lot of you're not really able to make friends, or you have a lot of disruption in the community where people are moving around a lot, maybe more likely for those individuals to experience loneliness. And that is something that I think we are actively investigating by asking participants and individually recontacting some of these participants from some of the studies I've conducted, and looking at their neighborhood factors and asking them about their neighborhoods and subsequently how they feel, and reports of loneliness as well. And so I think it will be a challenge, but I do think that we can use different methodology, different data sets, different population to kind of triangulate to kind of figure out what are the effects of loneliness.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Selton, Professor Social Exclusion and Mental Disorder at this university.
Dear Benson, welcome to Maastricht. I read your thesis with admiration. The relationships between several variables like residential instability, poverty, and low ethnic density and volumes of some areas of the brain are very, very interesting. The same applies to the positive impact of social engagement and physical activities on these volumes. Truly fascinating results. My compliments to you and also to Sinan and to Jim. I have two questions. My first question concerns biological mechanisms. I'm surprised that you rarely mention striatal dopamine dysregulation as a potential explanation for the relationship between stress and psychosis. I would like to mention, for instance, the study by Alice Egerton and Rumina Mizrahi, which reported elevated striatal dopamine release and elevated striatal dopamine synthesis capacity in immigrants, first and second generation, to Canada and Europe. As you know, the social positions of immigrants and ethnic minorities are similar. And the chronic social defeat stress model for rodents supports a link between defeat stress and dopamine. Is there a good reason for not mentioning this line of research?
Thank you, my highly esteemed opponent, for bringing up this very important area of investigation. I think a lot of the hypothesized mechanisms between what we're finding between these neighborhood factors, especially with decreased and reduced gray matter volume and neurobiological correlates, I think could be explained by dopamine hyperactivity in striatum, and I think that that's more of a molecular approach and something definitely to consider for future research. I think having access to that data as well as connecting that with the participants' neighborhood factors is something that we will, I would love to take a look at, and I think that that proposed hypothesis, I think there may be a link between ways of looking at social defeat through the social environment vis-a-vis neighborhood factors could be something that we could find and could be something that could explain this relationship. I'd be really curious to hear. I'd love to ask you more questions about the different data sets that are available, and I'm sure that this could be a future line of inquiry.
Thank you. And then another question is about the feelings and emotions of the participants who lived in these poor neighborhoods. You write about the importance of positive social connections and social engagement, but these are rather scientific terms. This reminds me of my teacher in psychiatry, the late Professor Piet Kuiper. In Amsterdam, he used to say that there is a conspiracy against feeling in psychiatry. My question to you is, the participants who lived in these neighborhoods, what did they feel? Which feelings or emotions are responsible for the anatomical findings? Well, you mentioned loneliness and anxiety, but I think there is more. I would like to hear your speculations.
Yeah, I mean, this is something of active investigation for me and my lab group right now. And we're hearing very fascinating stories of individuals living in these neighborhoods. I think one thing to consider is just kind of their feelings walking in the neighborhood when I'm interviewing them versus them recalling certain events, which could be different due to, I don't know, I think recall bias or things like that. But I think that generally there's also some talk about, this is just very preliminary, and we will need to do further studies, but I speculate that there may be feelings of lack of sense of belonging, not fitting in, feeling like they're very different than everyone else. Thank you.
You may complete your answer. Are you finished?
And so some of the feelings of feeling very different and how everyone else is not understanding them. I think those are some of the beginning to understand some of the feelings that individuals living in more residentially unstable places may experience. Thank you.
Benson Ku, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
Thank you.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
south side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Make the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Benson Ku, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense in view of the positive verdict and taken into account your previous qualifications. The degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Dr. Goulassus is authorized to confirm upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university customs. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
All right, please.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us, by law, and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Benson Ku, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by rector, the secretary, and the other members of the subcommittee, affixed with the official seal of the university.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I first met Benson almost 3 years ago in Florence through the CIRS mentorship program, where he was one of the early career awardees. And right away, I could tell that he was an ambitious and hardworking clinician scientist determined to be successful. But at first, I was a bit concerned about his overwhelming ambition, wondering maybe this is a little bit too much. But it didn't take too long to see his drive was well-grounded. Nothing in his life came easy. Everything he has achieved, has hustled for, turning challenges into opportunities. Benson, perhaps that's why I felt a deep connection with you, the similarities in our lives and the fight to achieve despite the challenges we faced. The more I know about Benson and his story, the more impressed I am. Growing up in Queens, New York, he was born into a first-generation immigrant family. He faced many challenges, growing up in a poor neighborhood, living below the poverty line, and often changing schools. Obviously not an ideal environment for growth, but he found a sense of belonging and support at the Boys Club of New York. And this played a key role in helping him build resilience and confidence. Benson, it is fascinating how our personal experiences often shape our careers, sometimes without us even realizing it. But in your case, the connection is anything but subconscious. It is clear that your own journey has directly inspired your research focus, understanding the impact of neighborhood characteristics and community resilience on mental health. I believe that this personal connection adds a deeper sense of purpose and passion to your work. This deep connection to your work has clearly been a driving force behind your success as a researcher. In just a few years, you built an impressive list of publications, secured competitive funding, and established yourself as one of the most promising next-generation clinician scientists in the United States. Truly, you're building a career that goes beyond the numbers. But never forget, particularly when you develop yourself into a highly successful PI, it's not just about the accolades, it's about the true passion and commitment you bring to your work, which sets you apart. I must say, through our work together during your PhD, I've been amazed by many times by how effortlessly you develop different approaches, applied new methods, and intersect different fields. You're like a magician. And now it makes all sense to me once you told me how much you were into magic and even performing card trick shows. People sometimes dismiss magic as gimmicks, but much like research, magic also takes hard work, perseverance, as well as creativity to innovate. And you are now channeling that spirit, that magician spirit, into your research. With recent global politics and the US election, staying persistent in your research will be more important than ever. Hard times are ahead of us. There is no doubt. Just recently, my grants application's feasibility was questioned, considering the political climate in the Netherlands. Moments like these test us, but they also remind us to find our inner strength so you never give up and never give in. As you progress in your career, the time is also approaching to start giving back to the community, mentoring others, especially those who come from challenging backgrounds. And that's the legacy that really matters. And let's be honest with ourselves, while our research outputs, awards, and grants are all important as testaments to our hard work, they won't be what people will remember most about us at our funeral. Benson, as you know, I shared some old life advice as your mentor, like never trust a cat-owning man. Jim, no offense, this only applies to single men with cats. Today, though, I have something important to share. For years of fasting, my approach to my career can be summed up by the Queen's rapper, Nas. I never sleep, because sleep is the cousin of that. And yes, I'm still very passionate about my work, but I also learned there is more to life than work. So my advice to you, remember to live, build and maintain relationships that matter, love and let yourself be loved, travel, and have fun. Finally, let me say it again. I feel incredibly lucky to have met you and being a small part of your impressive academic journey. Your PhD is a milestone, but it's far from the end of our academic partnership. I see it as the start of long-lasting collaboration. I'm excited to see you where your career takes you, and I will be cheering on your achievements. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Dear Dr. Ku, it's my pleasure also on behalf of the Maastricht University and the Board of Deans of our university to congratulate you with this new degree. And I believe that all members are convinced about the quality of your research and in fact also the relevance of your research. And we wish you all the best in your future academic career. Hereby I will close this academic ceremony and we will take a picture with the new doctor here in front of the screen and afterwards also on the stairs in the central hall.
Thank you.